The room shimmered like a jewel box that night. Golden light spilled from chandeliers, catching on every glass, every sequin, every fake smile. I remember thinking how surreal it was, sitting in a room full of people who admired my husband, yet not a single one of them truly knew him. Or me. I had spent the whole day preparing for this dinner, choosing a soft pearl-colored dress. The one Christopher said made me look expensive but not loud. I'd curled my hair carefully, worn the perfume he once bought me in Paris. It was meant to be his night, his company's celebration, and I wanted to be the perfect wife beside him, graceful, proud, and quietly supportive. But even before the first toast, I felt something off in the air. Christopher was in his element, laughing too loud, his hand resting a little too casually on the back of his assistant's chair. Everyone adored him. He had that charisma that fills a room and starves everyone else of oxygen. When he looked at me across the table, it wasn't affection that passed between us. It was calculation, as though he were measuring how long I'd last tonight before becoming invisible again. The waiter refilled our champagne glasses. Crystal against crystal. The sound was sharp, brittle, like something about to break. Then it happened. Christopher stood, glass raised, that polished smile plastered on his face. "A toast," he announced, his voice carrying easily over the hum of conversation. "To the woman who taught me patience." He paused for dramatic effect. "And how to survive a marriage without passion." The laughter that followed was immediate and cruel. High-pitched, effortless, like they'd all been waiting for the permission to mock. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering onto the plate. I felt heat rush to my cheeks, my pulse beating in my ears like a drum. For a heartbeat, I waited for him to look at me and say it was just a joke, a stupid, tasteless joke. But he didn't. He just smirked, took a slow sip of champagne, and kept talking to the man beside him. The laughter faded into a ringing silence inside me. I could no longer hear the clinking glasses or the music from the string quartet. All I could hear was the rush of blood and the echo of that word, without passion. My mind flashed back to mornings when I'd waited for him to notice the breakfast I'd made, to nights when I'd tried to talk and he'd turned to his phone. Every moment of dismissal now condensed into that single sentence. A punchline. I forced a smile that felt like glass cutting through my skin. "Excuse me," I murmured to no one in particular, and stood. As I walked toward the washroom, I felt eyes on my back, pitying, curious, indifferent. My heels clicked against the marble floor like tiny heartbeats. The scent of champagne and expensive perfume lingered in the air, sickly sweet. Inside the washroom, the world went quiet. The door shut behind me, sealing me in a capsule of sterile light and faint rose-scented soap. I faced the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't me, or not the me I used to know. Her eyes were hollow, makeup slightly smudged, pearls gleaming too brightly against her pale skin. She looked like a mannequin someone had dressed up for a life she no longer lived in. I gripped the edge of the sink. My reflection wavered slightly in the mirror, like it wanted to escape. "You've been erased," I whispered under my breath. "You've been erased in your own life." The thought wasn't born of anger. It was clarity, a cold, clean truth sliding into place. I turned on the tap, letting cold water run over my wrists. The diamond ring on my finger caught the light, that small, glittering symbol of love and ownership. It suddenly felt heavy, foreign, like a chain disguised as jewelry. I remembered the day he placed it on my hand, the promise, the vows, the gentle words, "You'll never have to stand alone again." But that's exactly what I'd been doing for years. In the distance, laughter drifted faintly through the walls. His laughter. I could almost picture him there, still basking in attention, already forgetting my absence. I slid the ring off my finger. It left a pale indentation on my skin, a mark of where I'd disappeared piece by piece. I placed it on the counter beside the sink. It made a soft metallic sound, like a bell tolling for something that had just died. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at that small circle of gold. Then I walked out. The restaurant's corridor felt endless, the polished floor reflecting chandeliers and strangers' shadows. I passed the maitre d', who smiled politely, unaware of the small act of rebellion I'd just committed. My pulse slowed as I neared the exit. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap. Cold, fresh, alive. The city stretched before me in glittering lights, indifferent and free. Cars whooshed by, laughter echoed from nearby terraces, and I realized how far away from myself I'd been living. I didn't take the car. I didn't call anyone. I just started walking. My heels clicked against the pavement until they hurt. So I took them off, carrying them in my hands. Behind me, the restaurant glowed like a lantern, a cage of light I was finally stepping out of. When I reached the corner, I glanced back one last time. Through the glass, I could see the blurred movement of people toasting again, raising their glasses high. But my chair, his wife's chair, sat empty, and there, on the table beside the untouched flute of champagne, gleamed my wedding ring. I turned away and walked into the night, barefoot, anonymous, weightless, for the first time in years. I used to believe love was about devotion, the quiet kind that didn't need recognition, only endurance. I told myself that if I loved Christopher enough, he'd eventually see me the way he once did, radiant, irreplaceable, essential. But I was wrong. We met on a gray afternoon 12 years ago, in a crowded university cafe that smelled of burnt espresso and wet wool. He was the guest speaker for a finance seminar. I was there editing a proposal for a literary journal. Our worlds were different, mine built from words, his from numbers, but his confidence had a gravity I couldn't resist. He noticed me instantly. "You look like someone who sees through things," he said, leaning against my table with that easy, boyish smile. I laughed nervously, unsure how to reply. Before I knew it, we were talking about books, cities we dreamed of visiting, and the kind of futures we wanted to build. When he told me he loved that I was quietly brilliant, I felt seen for the first time. No one had ever described me that way. Not brilliant, not quiet. Just seen, he said I was his calm in chaos. I believed him. Our early years were like a montage of golden afternoons. Drives through the countryside with the windows down, wine glasses clinking in small apartments, whispered plans of a life we'd build together. I kept journals back then, full of his promises, sketches of our someday home. I even pressed the first flower he gave me between the pages, a white lily. He said it represented devotion. But devotion, I would learn, is dangerous when it's only one-sided. After we married, the warmth began to cool. Slowly, imperceptibly, like a candle burning down. The first time he said, "You wouldn't understand finance?" I laughed. The second time I went quiet. By the fifth, I stopped offering opinions altogether. He was always handling things, the house, the taxes, the investments. He told me it was easier that way and I wanted to be easy. A good wife who didn't complicate what he called our vision. When I got an offer to lead a creative project abroad, I was elated. It was everything I'd worked for. But Christopher only smiled thinly and said, "Why chase someone else's dream when we can build ours here?" I declined the offer the next day. I told myself that sacrifices were part of love, that our shared dream mattered more than my personal ambition. But when our dream materialized, it looked a lot more like his. His company thrived, while I stayed behind to manage the home. He liked to say we were a team, but there was only ever one name on the business cards, one person who received the applause. I sold my grandmother's cottage to help him fund an expansion, the same cottage where I'd spent summers reading in the garden, where the air always smelled of rosemary and paint. It was my one inheritance, my last link to the woman who'd taught me strength. I told myself it was a noble gesture. He told me it was an investment in our future. My name never appeared on the contract. When I asked about it, he brushed my hair back from my face, kissed my forehead, and said, "You trust me, don't you?" And I did. Foolishly, fully. My friends noticed the change before I did. I started declining dinners, ignoring calls. My sister Claire was the only one who dared to say it out loud. "He doesn't want a wife, Elena. He wants an audience." I laughed it off, pretending she was being dramatic. Christopher was charming, to others, to me, when he wanted to be. He could make anyone feel foolish for doubting him. Whenever he grew distant, I found new ways to earn back his affection. I wrote him notes. Little messages slipped into his briefcase. "You're my constant. I'm proud of you." He never mentioned them, never even acknowledged if he'd seen them. I decorated our house with small details I thought he'd love. The scent of cedar candles, framed photographs of our travels, monogrammed napkins. He barely noticed. His world revolved around boardrooms and numbers, while mine revolved around keeping him proud. Every red flag I painted over with the color of devotion. When he canceled anniversaries for meetings, I told myself it was ambition. When he came home late smelling of perfume I didn't own, I told myself it was networking. It's strange how easily you can rewrite reality when you're afraid of what the truth might cost. And then, that dinner, that cruel, glittering night, stripped every lie bare. Driving home afterward, the city lights blurred through the windshield like tears I hadn't yet cried. I didn't play music. The silence between the hum of tires was enough. I could still hear their laughter, the way it rippled through the restaurant after his toast. It wasn't just a joke. It was a revelation. He'd said aloud what I'd been afraid to admit, that our marriage was an empty performance, and I was the prop. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the pearls around my neck pressing against my skin like a reminder of how much I'd tried to appear composed, valuable. The house loomed ahead as I turned into the driveway, our perfect, expensive prison. The porch light glowed warmly, the roses I'd planted last spring swayed in the breeze. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental inside me had shifted, cracked open. Inside, the scent of his cologne lingered faintly in the air. A half-empty glass of scotch sat on the sideboard, his signature ending to every night. I walked through the quiet rooms, touching the furniture, the framed photo from our wedding day. My smile in the picture was so bright it hurt to look at. I reached out and turned the frame face down. There, in the reflection of the darkened window, I caught a glimpse of myself, a silhouette moving through a house I no longer recognized. For years, I had built my life around his shadow, shaping my days to fit his moods, my choices to match his comfort. I had become an accessory to his ambition, a background note in his symphony of success. And tonight, with one cruel toast, he'd confirmed what I had quietly feared. I didn't exist in his story at all. The realization didn't come with anger. Not yet. Just grief. A deep, hollow ache that spread through me like cold water. When I finally sat down on the edge of our bed, I felt the faintest whisper of resolve stirring beneath the sorrow. Something small but alive. Because if he could laugh at the life I built for him, at me, then maybe it was time to stop standing in his shadow. Maybe it was time to find the light again. Silence had always been my shield. I once believed that holding my tongue was a mark of grace. That restraint made me dignified, composed. But in the weeks that followed that dinner, silence began to feel like my prison. Christopher acted as though nothing had happened. The morning after that toast, he strolled into the kitchen, freshly shaven, the scent of his aftershave cutting through the stillness like arrogance in a bottle. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, as if he hadn't reduced me to a punchline in front of 20 people the night before. He placed a small bouquet of white lilies on the counter, my favorite, though he hadn't remembered that in years. I stared at them. Their petals looked almost too pure, almost mocking. "Thought I'd bring you these," he said, sipping his coffee. "You seemed off last night." I wanted to ask him why he said what he did, why he laughed when they laughed. But instead, I only managed, "You embarrassed me." He looked up, surprised, not by my hurt, but by the audacity that I dared to speak it aloud. Then came the smirk, the one that had replaced his old smile somewhere between his second promotion and our 3rd year of marriage. "Oh, come on, Elena," he said, tone clipped with practiced charm. It was a joke. Everyone knew it. You take things too seriously. And there it was, the line that erased every protest, every plea I'd ever dared to voice. You take things too seriously. Days blurred into weeks. Christopher continued to play the doting husband for the world. He hosted dinners, introduced me as my better half, with that same effortless grin, and wrapped his arm around me for photos that captured everything but truth. At home, though, his laughter didn't echo anymore. His eyes skimmed past me at breakfast, as though I were a piece of furniture that occasionally breathed. The flowers wilted in their vase, untouched. One afternoon, I tried to find the courage again. We were in the living room. He was reviewing something on his tablet, his attention tethered to screens and numbers. "Christopher," I began softly. He didn't look up. Do you ever think about us?" He frowned. "What do you mean, us?" "The way things have changed," he sighed, finally setting the tablet down. "Elena, not everything needs a meaning. You're making drama where there isn't any. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand he look at me, really look at me. But all I could do was whisper, "It's not drama when you're disappearing." He scoffed. "You're being oversensitive again." Oversensitive. The word landed heavier than it should have. It wasn't new. He had used it before, in small doses, until it became a spell that silenced me completely. That night, I stood by our bedroom window, watching the rain streak across the glass. The city glittered in the distance, each drop refracting its light into fractured gold. I remembered how he used to stand behind me, arms around my waist, whispering dreams into my ear, of success, of travel, of building something together. Now, he was asleep behind me, his breathing slow even, untouched by the storm outside or the one within me. My reflection in the window looked almost spectral. The pearls I had worn that night at the restaurant still sat in the jewelry tray, the last remnants of a woman who once believed love was endurance. The next morning, I tried to log into our shared bank account. The password, our anniversary date, didn't work. I tried again. Then again. Finally, I called the bank. The voice on the other end hesitated. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ward, but your name is no longer authorized on this account." My breath caught. "That's not possible," I said. "It's our account." "I understand, ma'am, but the ownership was changed a few months ago. It's under Mr. Christopher Ward's name only." I hung up before she could finish the rest. My hands trembled as I reached for the drawer where we kept our paperwork. Contracts, statements, everything was meticulously filed, his system, his control, and there, in black and white, I saw the quiet betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. Every property deed, every business share, every account, all transferred, all stripped of my name. The man who once said everything we have is ours had made sure nothing truly was. That evening, he came home humming. The smell of whiskey followed him. "You look tense," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "Everything okay?" I stared at him. "You took my name off everything." He froze mid-step, then gave a short, amused laugh. "You checked? Why would you do that?" "Elena," he sighed, "you know I handle the finances. You hate that stuff." "I hate being lied to." His jaw tightened. For a second, I saw something raw flicker across his face. Not guilt, not regret, but irritation. "You're overreacting," he said finally, turning away. And just like that, the conversation ended, but the silence, once my prison, began to whisper. Late at night, when sleep refused to come, I wandered through the house, the one I had decorated with care, where every corner had once held laughter. Now it felt like a museum of someone else's life. I found myself standing before his study door. The faint hum of his computer still glowed through the crack. I pushed it open. The room smelled like cedar and ambition. Files stacked neatly, awards glinting under soft lamplight. On his desk, his laptop blinked. Still open, still alive. I hesitated, heart pounding. Then I moved closer. At first, it was just emails. Schedules, reports, the usual noise of his empire. But then I saw the thread. The name, Amelia, his assistant, flirtatious messages, late-night exchanges that blurred professional lines. Jokes about meetings that lasted longer than necessary, mentions of our secret. Scrolling further, I found the receipts, hotel bookings, jewelry purchases, spa gift cards, each tagged as business expense. And then, the photo. It was taken months ago at the same restaurant where he humiliated me. There he was, raising a glass, eyes glowing, with Amelia seated beside him. She was wearing my necklace. The gold chain I'd been searching for weeks earlier, the one he'd claimed the maid might have misplaced. The world spun. I felt my knees give way, my body crumbling onto the rug. My chest heaved and a sound tore out of me, raw, unrecognizable. Years of loyalty, devotion, and silence erupted into sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than my lungs. I wasn't crying just for the betrayal. I was crying for me, for the woman who sold her grandmother's cottage to fund his business, who believed in his dreams more than her own, who mistook neglect for maturity and humiliation for love. My tears fell onto the floor, darkening the fibers of the rug like ink stains, permanent, irrevocable. At some point, I stopped shaking. The sobs quieted, replaced by a strange, lucid calm. I stood up, wiping my face. My reflection in the dark computer screen looked hollow but alive, more real than it had been in years. He might own the walls, the accounts, the cars, even the air I'd been breathing beside him. But he didn't own me. Not anymore. The thought struck like lightning. Sharp, clear, liberating. I moved through the house, grabbing a small suitcase. Into it, I placed only what mattered. A few clothes, my journal, my grandmother's old scarf, the one I hadn't sold. On my way out, I paused by the bedroom. Christopher was still asleep, sprawled across the bed like a man utterly certain the world belonged to him. I watched him for a moment, then whispered to the quiet, "Keep your empire," and with that, I walked out into the pre-dawn chill. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. The gates closed behind me with a heavy metallic thud. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It sounded like freedom. When I left that house at dawn, the world looked different, like the air itself had been emptied of sound. I remember the way the gate clicked shut behind me. For the first time in years, there was no driver waiting, no alarm blaring from Christopher's phone, no polished leather shoes echoing in the hallway. Just the dull roll of my suitcase wheels over the gravel and the taste of metal in my mouth. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. For hours, I drove aimlessly, past the manicured suburbs that once felt like a fortress, through the thinning trees at the edge of town. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. Each mile between me and that house felt like a small rebellion. I ended up in a part of the city I hadn't seen in years, older, humbler, alive in its imperfections. A "For Rent" sign hung above a narrow storefront that smelled faintly of lilies and wet soil. The florist was an older woman named Miriam. Her eyes lingered on my suitcase, then on my silence. Without asking questions, she said softly, "The room upstairs is available. You can pay when you can." That night, I slept on a creaking bed under a leaking ceiling, surrounded by the scent of roses and rain. I should have felt despair. Instead, I felt blank. The silence was not cruel anymore. It was clean. The first week was survival. I sold my jewelry, not the wedding ring, that was long gone, but the diamond studs Christopher had once given me to match his success. The pawn shop owner didn't even lift his eyes. I left the store clutching a wad of bills, my pride somewhere behind me on the cold floor. Days blurred together. I lived above Miriam's shop, helping her wrap bouquets and sweep fallen petals from the floor. My hands, once accustomed to crystal glasses and expensive skincare, became calloused and raw. But there was an odd comfort in the routine. Flowers wilted, yes, but they also bloomed again. Sometimes at night, I'd catch my reflection in the shop's window. The woman staring back had dark circles, cracked lips, and a lightness that frightened her. Without the constant noise of Christopher's world, I began hearing my own thoughts, the quiet ones that had been buried under years of compromise. Miriam didn't pry, but she watched me closely. One evening, as I was arranging white hydrangeas, she said, "You handle them gently, like they might bruise." "I know what it's like to bruise," I murmured. She nodded and went back to trimming stems. It was the first time I had spoken of my pain aloud, even in half a sentence. In the evenings, I'd sit on the fire escape with tea, staring down at the street where children chased each other and old men argued over chess. No one there knew me as Christopher Ward's wife. I wasn't an accessory or a symbol of success. I was just a woman with tired eyes and soil beneath her fingernails. I began writing again. Small journal entries at first. Fragments. Thoughts like, "Freedom feels like a wound that doesn't sting yet." I found myself cataloging smells, colors, emotions, as if rebuilding language after years of silence. But healing isn't clean. It never is. There were nights when the memories came crashing through the walls. His laughter at that dinner, the look of pity in others' eyes, the weight of humiliation. I'd wake up gasping, clutching the sheets, shaking with anger I didn't know I still had. On those nights, I'd walk into the shop and bury my hands in the cool petals, breathing in the scent of lavender until the tremors eased. I learned that survival isn't about forgetting. It's about learning how to hold pain without letting it rot you. Weeks turned into months. I got a small freelance project. A boutique wanted help with its marketing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked late into the night, rediscovering the woman who once loved ideas, stories, and words. The same woman who once dreamed of studying in Florence before choosing a man over herself. One afternoon, while editing a client's campaign, I caught sight of an old photo I'd tucked in my notebook. Me at 25, standing outside that cottage I'd sold to fund Christopher's dream. My smile was radiant, untouched by disillusion. I realized that version of me wasn't gone, just buried under years of obedience. Miriam noticed the change too. "Your shoulders aren't as heavy anymore," she said one morning, pouring coffee. I smiled faintly. Maybe I'm learning how to walk without apology. Then, one rainy evening, everything shifted. I was locking up the shop when I saw him, Christopher, across the street standing under a black umbrella. My heart stuttered. He hadn't changed much. Still immaculate, still smug in posture. For a moment our eyes met. He smirked, as if he had found a runaway pet. I froze. Every instinct screamed to run back inside, but I stood my ground. He crossed the street, water splashing under his shoes, and said casually, "So this is where you've been hiding." His tone was soft, almost pitying. It made my stomach twist. "I'm not hiding," I said quietly. He glanced around the humble storefront. "From the looks of it, you're surviving on pity and petals." The words cut deep, but something inside me had changed. Instead of defending myself, I said, "It's enough." His eyes flickered. Confusion, maybe disbelief. Then he smiled coldly. "You'll come back. You always do." When he left, the streetlight caught the back of his umbrella, a faint reflection, like oil on water. I realized he no longer terrified me. He just looked. Small that night, I didn't cry. I wrote. Pages and pages, about control disguised as love, about the slow suffocation of identity. And somewhere between the lines, I found an idea. A direction. If he thought I'd vanish into nothing, I would build something so bright, so undeniable, that it would burn through the shadow he left behind. The next morning, I walked into the florist shop with a different kind of energy, quiet but resolute. "Miriam," I said, "how do you feel about expanding?" She looked up, puzzled. "Expanding?" I told her my plan, an online flower delivery brand, curated with meaning and story. Each bouquet would carry a message. For the ones who let go. For the ones who stayed too long. For the ones who finally chose themselves. Her lips curved into a smile. "You sound alive again." "I think I am." That was the moment I took my first real breath since leaving him. Months later, when our small business went live, Bloom in Truth, I stayed up all night watching the orders trickle in. Strangers wrote messages like, "To my sister who deserves peace," and "To the woman who finally left." I wept softly, not from sadness, but from recognition. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was creating something born from everything I had lost. Sometimes I still dream of that night. The laughter, the champagne, the cruel toast. But now, when I wake up, the scent that fills the air isn't his cologne. It's roses. Always roses. And when I pass the mirror, I recognize her, the woman looking back. She isn't hollow anymore, she's becoming whole. The first real sign of rebirth came quietly, not in applause or victory, but in the steady hum of my laptop at dawn. It had been nearly a year since I left Christopher. Bloom in Truth had grown from a modest idea into something that pulsed with life. Women from all over the country sent stories along with their orders, confessions, farewells, love letters to themselves. I read each one before sending the bouquets out, my fingers trembling as I realized how many of us had been silenced in beautiful cages. Miriam often said the shop smelled like courage in disguise. I began to feel it too. Each morning, I walked to work with purpose. My clothes were simple, my hair shorter now, and my smile, unpracticed for so long, had started to return naturally. The shadows of my old life still followed me, but they no longer ruled me. They reminded me of what I'd survived. One evening, I received an email from a women's entrepreneurship foundation. They had seen my work and invited me to apply for a grant, one that could scale Bloom in Truth into a national brand. I sat staring at the screen, my heart beat loud in the silence. A year ago, I could barely afford tea. Now someone saw potential in me. I whispered aloud, "He doesn't get to define my worth anymore." The application process forced me to face my past in unexpected ways. I had to provide documents, tax records, things that reminded me of how Christopher had erased my name from everything we once shared. When I saw the word unemployed beside my old records, I laughed softly. "Not anymore," I said to the empty room, but something else stirred inside me. An awareness that my story wasn't just survival, It was evidence. Evidence of manipulation, financial abuse, humiliation. For the first time, I saw that my silence had protected him. And I didn't owe him that protection anymore. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a small women's networking event. Me, the woman who once forgot how to use her own voice. I almost declined, afraid my story was too raw, too ordinary. But Miriam looked at me over her cup of chamomile tea and said, "Elena, ordinary pain is what connects us. Speak." So, I did. The night of the event, I wore a simple black dress, one I'd bought from a thrift store when I first moved above the florist. I still remembered the scent of that old place, damp walls, faint perfume, hope. Standing in front of the small crowd, my palms damp, I said, "I used to think strength meant staying quiet." That dignity was endurance. But silence can become a weapon, not against them, but against yourself. As I spoke, the room changed. I saw tears, nods, shared pain. When I finished, there was a long pause before the applause, the kind of silence that means people truly heard you. Afterward, a woman approached me. "You have a way with words," she said. "Have you ever considered writing your story?" Her comment lingered long after she left. I started writing that very night, not to expose him, not yet, but to remember myself. Each page was a reclamation. I wrote about the girl who gave up her dreams, the wife who lost her reflection, the woman who walked away with nothing but a suitcase and a will to breathe. It wasn't revenge that guided me. It was truth. But truth has a way of attracting justice. Bloom and Truth continued to grow. We launched a partnership with a local charity, offering free bouquets to shelters for women leaving abusive relationships. Every week, I'd deliver the flowers myself. The first time I saw a woman clutch a small bouquet with trembling hands, whispering, "Thank you," I realized survival wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to build that desire, quiet, fierce. Consuming became my new purpose. Then one morning, while sipping coffee at my desk, an email arrived. It was from a mutual acquaintance, someone from Christopher's old company. The message was brief. "He's in trouble. Financial audit coming. You might want to see this." Attached were documents, balance sheets, private transactions, irregular transfers between accounts. My hands froze as I read. Many of the accounts bore names I recognized. Shell companies Christopher had once told me didn't concern me. But one line stood out. Ward Holdings. Primary capital secured through unregistered collateral. Real estate liquidation. 2019. My grandmother's cottage. The one I'd sold to help him expand. He hadn't sold it for the business. He had used it to secure his own private fund. Something inside me shifted. Not fury, but clarity. I wasn't looking for vengeance. But I couldn't ignore this anymore. I called a lawyer the next day, a woman named Adrienne, known for her calm precision. Sitting across from her in her glass-walled office, I laid out everything: the manipulation, the erased signatures, the property, the humiliation. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving swiftly across her notepad. When I finished, she said, "Mrs. Ward, you have more power than you think, especially now that he's under investigation." "I don't want money," I said. "I just want the truth to exist somewhere other than my memory." She smiled faintly. "Then let's make it official." We began gathering proof: emails, contracts, photos, even my old messages with Christopher. Each document felt like lifting another stone off my chest. In the months that followed, I learned that healing and justice aren't opposites. They're stages of the same awakening. My world expanded in ways I never expected. Bloom and Truth received the grant. We opened a second location. I hired women who, like me, were rebuilding their lives. The shop became a sanctuary, not of pity, but of rebirth. One afternoon, Miriam brought me a box. "Found this in the storage closet," she said. Inside was a small perfume bottle, one I hadn't seen in years. It was the scent Christopher once said was too sweet, too young for a wife. I uncapped it and breathed deeply. The fragrance was soft, nostalgic, unashamed. I smiled. "He was wrong," I whispered. "That night, I wore that perfume for the first time in years." It didn't remind me of him. It reminded me of me. As winter approached, word of Christopher's downfall spread quietly through business circles. Rumors of fraudulent accounts, missing funds, frozen assets. He had made too many enemies, trusted too few. I stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of grace. Until one evening, a letter arrived at Bloom and Truth. It was from him. Elena, I need to talk. You've always had influence and they're twisting things. You know I never meant to hurt you. Maybe we can fix this, together. I read it twice, my pulse steady. The irony made me laugh. He, who once mocked my worth, now needed my voice to save his reputation. I folded the letter neatly and placed it inside my journal. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Power changes hands silently. Not when you scream, but when you stop needing to. In the mirror that night, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, not because she was broken, but because she was whole. The scars remained, but they no longer defined her. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for closure. I was closure. But something inside me whispered, softly, insistently, that the story wasn't done. He had taken my voice once. I would use it now, not in anger, but in truth. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I would publish my story. Not as revenge, but as testimony. The book would be titled, The Language of Power. The writing consumed me for months. Every sentence felt like stepping into light after years in darkness. I didn't write him as a villain. I wrote him as he was, charming, brilliant, hollow. And I wrote myself as I had become patient, wounded, resilient. When I sent the manuscript to a small publisher, I expected rejection. Instead, I received a call from the editor herself. It's raw, it's elegant, it's necessary, she said. We want to publish it. I wept quietly when I hung up. Not out of joy, but relief. My story was no longer confined to my memory. It belonged to the world now. When the first copies arrived, I held the book in my hands and traced my name on the cover. Elena Ward, my name, not erased, not hidden, not someone's accessory. The scent of fresh paper mixed with the faint perfume I now wore every day. The one he once said didn't suit me. Everything had come full circle. I didn't know it yet. But the book's release would bring the final confrontation I hadn't planned. He would come back. And this time I would meet him not as the woman he once owned, but as the woman he could never understand. When the court's decision was read, I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Christopher sat across from me, the same man who once called me his calm, now reduced to a storm of disbelief. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but he just stared at me. Maybe he expected me to gloat or to crumble again. But there was no victory dance, no tears. Only the stillness of someone who had finally stopped trying to be understood. The judge's voice felt far away, but her words were sharp and steady. Given the evidence of asset concealment, emotional abuse, and fraudulent exclusion of the claimant, the court rules in favor of Mrs. Elena Rowe. The title Mrs. still felt heavy, like a ghost I hadn't shaken off yet. But in that moment, it became something else, proof of how far I'd come. When I walked out of that courtroom, the air was cool and clean. The city traffic hummed around me. People hurried past carrying their own invisible burdens. And I thought, maybe that's all life is, the courage to keep walking with your wounds visible. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a small apartment near the river. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. The floors creaked in familiar rhythm, and I painted the walls in soft creams and muted blues, colors of clarity. The first night there, I unpacked a single box labeled "Keep Inside" were only a few things. My grandmother's locket. A single silver ring I had bought for myself. A stack of old photographs from before Christopher. The handwritten note I once left in his office years ago. "You're not alone. I believe in you." I read it again, and for the first time, I didn't feel foolish. I felt kind. I had loved deeply, even when it wasn't returned. That wasn't weakness. That was proof I still had a heart. Christopher's empire began to crumble soon after. The audit reports became public. His assistant, the one with my necklace, left him. Investors pulled out, questioning integrity issues. I never reached out. I didn't need to. The silence between us was now complete, and it belonged to me. One evening, as I sat by the river with a cup of coffee, I saw an email pop up on my screen. The subject line read, "Ka, can we talk?" It was from him. For a moment, my hand hovered over the trackpad. I imagined what he might say. "I miss you," or "You misunderstood me." Or perhaps, "Let's start over." But none of those words could touch me anymore. I clicked delete. The ripples on the river caught the last light of the sunset, streaks of gold fading into blue. I whispered almost to the water. We already talked enough. One afternoon, I visited the courthouse again, not for a case, but to drop off some paperwork for my new business. The clerk smiled when she read the letterhead, ER Consulting, Independent Brand Development. I had gone back to what I was good at before him. I started helping small, struggling companies find their voices, teaching them how to tell stories that meant something. Each project reminded me of what I had lost and what I had rebuilt from the ashes. My first client, a young designer, said to me once, "You make people believe in themselves again." I smiled quietly and thought, I had to learn it the hard way first. Months later, I went back to the old house, the one that used to be ours. It had been listed for sale after the settlement. The garden was overgrown. The shutters hung crookedly, as if even the house had tired of pretending. Through the glass door, I could see the grand staircase where we once stood for our wedding photo, me in white silk, him in a black suit. I remembered the way he kissed my forehead then, saying, "We'll make this place our kingdom." And we did. But kingdoms built on control always fall. I left a small envelope in the mailbox. Inside, a copy of the deed transfer, signed by him, now with my name restored. And beneath it, a note in my handwriting. "You taught me to disappear. I taught myself to return." That night back home, I opened my journal, the same one I used during those sleepless nights in the motel. The pages were filled with anger, confusion, grief. But as I turned the last few, they were blank, a clean space. I took my pen and wrote, "Forgiveness is not returning to what broke you. It's walking away without looking back, and still wishing them peace." The words didn't feel like closure. They felt like breathing. I lit a candle, lavender, my grandmother's favorite scent, and set it beside the window. The flame flickered gently against the glass, its reflection dancing like a heartbeat. Outside, the city was alive. Somewhere, someone was falling in love. Somewhere else, someone was learning how to leave, and I was learning how to stay with myself. Weeks later, I stood in front of a group of women at a community center, invited to speak about financial independence and emotional resilience. I told them everything. Not names, not scandal. Just the truth. How easy it is to lose yourself slowly, one compromise at a time. How silence can be mistaken for peace. How love can turn into control, disguised as care. When I finished, a woman in the back raised her hand and asked, "Do you ever miss him?" The question hung in the air. I thought about the perfume bottles, the dinners, the laughter that used to fill that cold marble house. Then I smiled softly. Sometimes I miss the woman I was when I believed him. But I don't miss the cage, they nodded. Some cried. And I realized my story was no longer just mine. It had become a mirror for others to find their own reflection. The last image I'll leave you with is simple. Me, sitting on my balcony, feet tucked under a blanket, holding a cup of tea. The wind carries the faint smell of rain and jasmine. On my wrist, the silver ring glints faintly under the streetlight, not a symbol of belonging to anyone else, but of surviving myself. And as I look out at the river shimmering in the night, I whisper a final truth I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't heal by winning against them. You heal by no longer needing to. And with that, I close the chapter, not on him, but on the version of me that waited for permission to exist. Now I write my own story. In my own name. At last.